Natalie had one simple plan: survive a blind date, smile politely, and disappear into the night unnoticed. But fate had other ideas. One clumsy escape attempt later, she found herself pressed against a stranger's chest, a man whose presence felt like gravity itself. Thomas wasn't supposed to be part of the evening, yet somehow in the chaos of pretending, something real began to unfold, and neither of them saw it coming. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member for early access to the next stories. And if you truly felt it was worth listening to, hit that super thanks button too. Your support means everything and helps us keep bringing stories that move you. Have you ever felt like you're living everyone else's life except your own? Like somewhere along the way, you stopped being the main character of your own story? I used to think that feeling was just part of getting older, until I realized it wasn't. There's something I left in the pinned comment that speaks directly to this. Not for everyone, only for those who still believe there's more waiting for them. Natalie had never been good at saying no to Emma. That was how she found herself sitting in a dimly lit wine bar on a Friday night, wearing a dress she'd bought 3 years ago and hadn't touched since, waiting for a man whose name she'd already forgotten. Emma had promised he was perfect, successful, charming, emotionally available, all the boxes checked. Natalie didn't believe in boxes anymore, but she'd agreed anyway, if only to stop the relentless texts. The bar smelled like expensive cologne and desperation. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers, and couples leaned into each other across candlelit tables, whispering secrets Natalie was sure she didn't want to know. She stirred her gin and tonic with a thin plastic straw, watching the ice cubes spin in lazy circles, wondering how quickly she could escape without seeming rude. Then he walked in. Not her date, someone else entirely. He wore a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than her rent, the kind of tailored perfection that suggested either old money or new ambition. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it one too many times that day, and when his eyes swept across the room, they carried the kind of tired intensity that came from too many late nights and not enough reasons to go home early. Natalie looked away quickly, focusing on her phone. Emma had texted again. "He's running late, don't leave." Of course he was. She was debating whether 10 more minutes was reasonable when she heard a voice beside her, low, smooth, with just a hint of amusement. "Rough night?" She glanced up. The man in the charcoal suit stood beside her table, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of whiskey. Up close he was even more striking. Sharp jawline, dark eyes that seemed to notice everything, and a smile that suggested he knew exactly how disarming he was. "Something like that," Natalie replied. "And you?" "Same." He gestured toward the empty chair. "Mind if I sit? My table isn't ready yet." Before she could respond, he'd settled into the seat, stretching his long legs beneath the table. "Thomas," he said, extending his hand. "Natalie." His palm was warm, his grip firm. She pulled her hand back a little too quickly, suddenly aware of how long she'd held it. "So," Thomas said, leaning back, "what brings you here?" "A blind date I'm already regretting." "Ah," his smile widened. "And where is this lucky gentleman?" "Late, or possibly fictional." "Well, his loss." Thomas raised his glass in a mock toast. "To terrible timing and unexpected company." She clinked her glass against his, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease. There was something disarming about him, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. They talked, about nothing, about everything. He told her he ran a tech company, that he spent most of his time in meetings that could have been emails, that he'd come to the bar because his apartment felt too quiet. She told him she worked in marketing, that Emma had been trying to set her up for months because apparently being single at 32 was a crisis requiring intervention. "Sounds like Emma needs a hobby," Thomas said. "She has one, it's called meddling." He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Natalie found herself smiling back, caught off guard by how easy this felt. Then she saw him, her blind date, walking toward the bar, scanning the room with the frantic energy of someone who knew they were late. He was exactly what Emma had described, tall, clean-cut, wearing a blazer that screamed, "I read business books on the weekend." And Natalie felt absolutely nothing. "That's him," she whispered, Thomas followed her gaze, then turned back to her. "You don't look thrilled." "I'm not." "Want me to get rid of him?" She blinked. "What?" "Play along." Before she could protest, Thomas reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that felt startlingly intimate. "Just trust me." Her date spotted her and started walking over. Natalie's pulse quickened, not because of him, but because of the way Thomas was looking at her now. His dark eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. "Natalie?" Her date stopped at the table, frowning. "Sorry, I'm late. Traffic was—" "Actually," Thomas said smoothly, not breaking eye contact with her, "Natalie's evening is already taken." The man's frown deepened. "Excuse me." Thomas finally looked up, his smile polite but unmistakably possessive. "She's here with me, have been for the last hour, so unless you have a very good explanation for why you're interrupting our date, I'd suggest you find another table." Natalie should have corrected him, should have laughed it off, apologized, explained the misunderstanding. But the feel of Thomas's hand in hers, the warmth of his touch, the way he'd stepped in without hesitation, it all made her stay silent. Her date muttered something under his breath and walked away. Thomas released her hand slowly, but his eyes never left hers. "You're welcome." That was presumptuous? I was going to say perfect. His smile softened into something more genuine, more dangerous. "Does that mean I get to keep you for the rest of the evening?" Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs. She should have said no, should have thanked him and left. But instead, she heard herself say, "I think you've earned it." They stayed until the bar closed, talked about childhood dreams and adult disappointments, favorite books and worst first dates. When the bartender finally announced last call, Thomas walked her to her car, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, a touch so casual, yet so deliberate, it sent shivers up her spine. "Can I see you again?" he asked, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woodsy and warm. "I don't even know your last name." "Carter. Thomas Carter." He pulled out his phone. "Your number." She typed it in, her fingers trembling slightly. When she handed it back, their fingers brushed and the electricity between them was undeniable. "Good night, Natalie," he said softly. "Good night." She drove home in a daze, her mind replaying every moment, every look, every touch. Her phone buzzed before she'd even reached her apartment. "Thomas, already missing that smile of yours." And just like that, something had begun. The plan had been simple. Thomas would pretend to be her jealous boyfriend for 5 minutes. They'd share a polite laugh afterward, and that would be the end of it. A funny story to tell at dinner parties. Nothing more. But life had other plans. Natalie couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he'd looked at her across that table, like she was the only person who mattered in a room full of strangers, about the warmth of his hand wrapped around hers, the protective edge in his voice when he'd sent her date away, the way his cologne had lingered on her dress long after she'd gotten home. She'd woken up Saturday morning to another text from him. "Thomas. Coffee? I know a place that makes the kind of brew that feels like a warm hug." She'd stared at her phone for a full minute, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. This was dangerous territory. She barely knew him. He could be anyone. A player, a workaholic, someone who collected phone numbers like business cards and moved on without looking back. But then she remembered his laugh, the genuine way he'd listened when she talked, the fact that he hadn't tried to kiss her goodnight, even though the tension between them had been thick enough to cut with a knife. "Natalie, what time?" They met at a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a vintage record shop, the kind of place that smelled like fresh pastries and old dreams. Thomas was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 steaming cups in front of him, scrolling through his phone with a slight frown that disappeared the moment he saw her. "You came," he said, standing up. He wore jeans today, dark, well-fitted, and a grey Henley that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. Casual Thomas was somehow even more attractive than suit Thomas, and that realization made Natalie's stomach flip. "You doubted I would?" "Honestly? A little." He pulled out her chair, a gesture so old-fashioned it should have felt awkward, but somehow didn't. "I thought you might wake up and realize I'm just some guy who crashed your terrible date." "Some guy," Natalie repeated, sitting down. "Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it?" She picked up her coffee, inhaling the rich aroma, hazelnut and something darker, more complex. "I'm still figuring that out." Thomas leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes locked on hers. "Well, while you're figuring it out, tell me something real, something you don't tell everyone." The request caught her off guard. Most people stuck to safe topics: weather, work, weekend plans. But Thomas had a way of cutting through the superficial, diving straight into the depths without warning. "I wanted to be a writer," she said finally. "When I was younger, I filled notebooks with stories, stayed up all night creating worlds that felt more real than my own life. And then somewhere along the way, I convinced myself it was impractical, that I needed a real job, a stable income, a plan that made sense. And now I write ad copy for protein shakes and smart home devices." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Living the dream. Thomas reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture was simple, but the warmth of his touch sent electricity racing up her arm. "It's not too late, you know, to write something that matters," says the CEO who probably hasn't taken a vacation in years. "Touché." He squeezed her hand gently before pulling back, and Natalie immediately missed the contact. "But that's different. I love what I do." "Do you?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Natalie wanted to lie, to brush it off with something clever and deflecting, but those dark eyes saw right through her. "No," she admitted quietly. "I don't." "Then change it." "It's not that simple. It never is." Thomas picked up his coffee, his gaze never leaving hers. "But the complicated things are usually the ones worth doing." They stayed for hours. Long after their coffee had gone cold, long after the lunch crowd had filled and emptied the cafe, they talked about everything: childhood scars and adult fears, the books that had changed them, the dreams they'd abandoned, and the ones they still carried like secrets. At some point, Thomas reached across the table and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so intimate, so tender, that Natalie's breath caught in her throat. "You're beautiful when you talk about things you care about," he said softly. "Your whole face lights up." "Thomas, I know. Too much. Too soon." But he didn't look away, didn't take his hand back. "I have this problem where I say exactly what I'm thinking, when I should probably keep my mouth shut." "I don't mind," Natalie whispered. And she didn't. There was something refreshing about his honesty, the way he laid his cards on the table without games or pretense. "Good." His thumb traced a slow line down her cheek, and she leaned into the touch before she could stop herself. "Because I'm thinking a lot of things right now, and most of them involve wanting to see you again, and again, until you get sick of me. That might take a while. Promise. Promise." When they finally left the cafe, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Thomas walked her to her car again, and this time when he stood close, Natalie didn't step back. "This is crazy," she said, looking up at him. "We barely know each other. I know you take your coffee black, that you bite your lip when you're thinking, that you have a laugh that makes me want to spend the rest of my life figuring out how to hear it again." His voice was low, intimate. "That's not nothing, Natalie." She should have been scared, should have put up walls, protected herself from the intensity of whatever this was becoming. But all she felt was the magnetic pull between them, growing stronger with every passing second. "Text me when you get home," Thomas asked. "Only if you text me first." He grinned. "Deal." She drove away with her heart racing and her phone already buzzing in her purse. "Thomas, already counting down until I see you again." And that was when Natalie knew. This wasn't just a spark. It was a wildfire, and she was already burning. The text started the next morning. Natalie woke up to a photo of a coffee cup with foam art that looked more like a blob than the intended heart, accompanied by a message that made her laugh out loud in bed. Thomas. Tried to impress the barista with my latte art skills. Pretty sure I just offended an entire nation of Italians. She rolled over, still smiling, and typed back. Natalie. That's not a heart. That's a crime scene. Thomas. Harsh, but fair. How do you take your Sunday mornings, besides with brutal honesty? Natalie. Slow. Pajamas until noon, bad reality TV. You? Thomas. Pretending I'm going to be productive while actually binge-watching documentaries about things I'll never need to know. Natalie. Like what? Thomas. Currently learning about deep-sea creatures. Did you know there's a fish that looks like it's permanently screaming? Feels relatable on Mondays. And just like that, it became their thing. Thomas texted her throughout the day. Random observations, terrible jokes, photos of his lunch meetings that he captioned with increasingly creative complaints. Natalie found herself checking her phone more often than she cared to admit, her heart doing a small flip every time she saw his name on her screen. Thomas. Client just used the phrase synergistic paradigm shift, unironically. Send help. Natalie. Pour one out for corporate jargon everywhere. Thomas. Already on my third coffee. At this rate, I'll be able to taste colors by dinner. The messages were light, playful, the kind of banter that felt effortless. But underneath the humor, there was something else. A growing familiarity. An intimacy that came from sharing the mundane moments that most people kept to themselves. On Tuesday, he sent her a photo of his desk. Papers everywhere, 2 empty coffee cups, a half-eaten sandwich that had clearly been forgotten hours ago. Thomas. This is what having it all together looks like, in case you were wondering. Natalie. Iconic. Very CEO of you. Thomas. What does your desk look like right now? She glanced at her own workspace. Surprisingly neat, color-coded folders. A succulent that was somehow still alive despite her best efforts to kill it through neglect. Natalie. Like I'm compensating for the chaos in my head. Thomas. I like your chaos. Natalie. You haven't seen it yet. Thomas. Can't wait to. The comment sat between them, loaded with implications neither of them addressed. Instead, Thomas sent a meme about procrastination, and they moved on. But Natalie saved the message anyway, rereading it more times than she'd ever admit. By Wednesday, Emma had noticed the change. You're smiling at your phone again, she said, appearing in Natalie's office doorway with her arms crossed and an expression that screamed, I told you so. Please tell me you finally gave that blind date a chance. Not exactly. What does that mean? Natalie hesitated, then showed Emma the latest message, a video Thomas had sent of himself attempting to make breakfast, which had devolved into smoke, cursing, and what looked like the saddest scrambled eggs in human history. Thomas. Gordon Ramsay would have me executed. Emma's eyes widened. Who is this man, and why haven't I heard about him? Remember the blind date you set up? The one you bailed on. I didn't bail. I was there. But then, someone else showed up. Natalie Rose Carter. You have been holding out on me. Emma sat down uninvited, pulling her chair close. Spill. Everything. So she did. The wine bar, the impromptu rescue, the coffee date that had lasted 6 hours, the constant stream of messages that had turned her phone into her favorite distraction. This is adorable, Emma said when she finished, also slightly nauseating, but mostly adorable. It's just texting. Just texting. Emma snorted. When was the last time you smiled like that over just texting? Natalie didn't have an answer. That night, Thomas called instead of texting. His voice came through rough, tired but warm. Long day? Natalie asked, settling onto her couch with a glass of wine. The longest. Spent 4 hours in a board meeting that could have been an email, then another 2 cleaning up a mess that wasn't even mine to begin with. He sighed, and she could picture him running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was frustrated. But hearing your voice makes it better. Smooth talker. Honest talker. A pause. What are you doing right now? Drinking wine and judging people on home renovation shows. Can I join you? You want to come over? Her heart skipped. Not tonight. I'm barely functioning. But soon? I miss your face. You saw me 3 days ago. 3 days too long. They stayed on the phone for 2 hours, talking about nothing and everything. Thomas told her about his first failed startup, about the night he'd almost given up on everything. Natalie told him about her college years, about the professor who'd told her she had talent but lacked discipline, words that still stung a decade later. "He was wrong, you know," Thomas said quietly. "About the discipline part. You're one of the most focused people I've ever met." "You barely know me." "I know enough." When they finally hung up, Natalie's cheeks hurt from smiling. Her phone buzzed one last time before she fell asleep. "Thomas, sweet dreams, Natalie. Try not to judge any more innocent homeowners too harshly." "Natalie, no promises." "Thomas, that's my girl." She stared at those 3 words, "my girl," until her vision blurred. It was casual, probably meaningless, but it felt like a promise wrapped in a joke, and she wasn't ready to examine why that made her chest tighten, with something dangerously close to hope. The next morning, there was another photo waiting for her. Thomas holding a successfully made omelette, grinning at the camera like he'd just won an award. "Thomas, character development. Gordon Ramsay can sleep easy tonight." "Natalie, proud of you. When do I get to taste your cooking?" "Thomas, whenever you're ready to risk food poisoning in the name of romance." "Natalie, romance? Is that what this is?" The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Thomas, I'm hoping so." And there it was, the truth, laid bare in a text message sent at 8:37 on a Thursday morning. No games, no pretense. Just Thomas being Thomas, honest and direct and terrifyingly genuine. Natalie's hands shook as she typed back. "Natalie, me too." Thomas started showing up, not in a suffocating way, not with grand gestures or overwhelming intensity, but in the small, quiet moments that somehow meant more. He'd appear at her office around lunchtime with sandwiches from the deli she'd mentioned loving 3 weeks ago, the order memorized down to the extra pickles she always requested. He'd text her on Wednesday mornings, asking if she needed her usual coffee before a big presentation, then show up 20 minutes later with a caramel latte and a chocolate croissant. "You're going to make me gain 10 pounds, Natalie said one afternoon, accepting the paper bag he handed her. "Good, you barely eat lunch." Thomas leaned against her desk, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. "Besides, I like taking care of you." The words hung between them, heavier than they should have been. Emma, who'd been passing by, caught Natalie's eye and mouthed, "Marry him," before disappearing around the corner. But it wasn't just food. Thomas started weaving himself into the fabric of her daily life, with an ease that should have terrified her but somehow didn't. He learned her schedule, her habits, the small things that made her days easier. When her car broke down on a rainy Tuesday, he showed up with an umbrella and drove her home without making her feel like a burden. When she mentioned missing her favorite Brazilian dessert, he spent an entire Saturday learning to make brigadeiros, burning the first 3 batches before finally getting it right. "These are pretty good," Natalie said, popping one of the chocolate truffle-like balls into her mouth. They were sitting in her apartment, Thomas on the floor with his back against the couch. Natalie curled up on the cushions above him. "Pretty good?" Thomas twisted around to look at her, mock offense written across his face. "I spent 6 hours perfecting those." "Okay, they're amazing. Happy?" Deliriously. He reached up and stole one from the container in her lap, their fingers brushing. Even that small contact sent electricity racing across her skin. It had been 6 weeks since the wine bar, and they still hadn't defined what they were. They texted constantly, saw each other almost every day, shared secrets and silences that felt more intimate than anything Natalie had experienced with men she'd actually dated. But Thomas hadn't kissed her, hadn't tried to push for more, and Natalie couldn't decide if she was relieved or frustrated by his restraint. "Movie?" Thomas asked, grabbing the remote. "Your turn to pick." "Horror." "You hate horror." "I know, but you love it, and I like watching you get excited about things." Something shifted in his expression, softened and intensified all at once. "Natalie." "Don't." She pressed her finger to his lips, the touch sending sparks through both of them. "Just pick the movie." He chose something with terrible special effects and a plot that made no sense, providing commentary throughout that had Natalie laughing more than screaming. Somewhere around the 40-minute mark, she found herself sliding down onto the floor beside him, their shoulders pressed together, the space between them charged with unspoken words. "You're not even watching," Thomas murmured, his eyes on the screen, but his attention clearly on her. "Neither are you." "Fair point." He shifted, draping his arm across the back of the couch behind her, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Want me to start it over?" "No, I want you to keep doing exactly what you're doing." His breath hitched. "And what's that?" "Being here. Being you." Thomas turned to face her fully, his dark eyes searching hers in the flickering light from the TV. "I'm not going anywhere, Natalie. I hope you know that. People always say that. I'm not people." His hand found hers in the space between them, fingers threading together with a naturalness that felt like coming home. "I've dated. Had relationships that looked right on paper but felt empty. And then I met you, and suddenly everything else seems like I was just killing time, waiting for this. For you." Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs. "Thomas, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." He squeezed her hand gently. "No pressure, no expectations. I'm all in here. Whenever you're ready, however you need me to be." She wanted to kiss him, wanted to close the distance between them, and finally break the tension that had been building for weeks. But something held her back. Fear, maybe, or the knowledge that once they crossed that line, everything would change. And she wasn't sure she was ready for everything to change when what they had right now felt so perfectly, terrifyingly right. So instead, she leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling his arm come around her, pulling her close. They stayed like that for the rest of the movie, neither of them watching, both of them acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. Thomas started staying later after that night, helping her cook dinner, even though his skills were questionable at best. Sitting at her kitchen counter doing work on his laptop while she read on the couch, the comfortable silence between them speaking volumes. He'd leave around 11, always with a lingering hug at her door, his hand cupping the back of her head, his lips pressing against her temple in a kiss that felt like a promise. "Good night, Nat," he'd whisper, using the nickname he'd started calling her somewhere along the way. "Night, Thomas." And then he'd leave, and Natalie would lean against the closed door, her heart racing, wondering how much longer she could pretend this was just friendship. One Saturday afternoon, Emma cornered her at the grocery store. "So when are you going to admit you're in love with him?" "I'm not," Natalie started, but the lie died on her tongue. "It's complicated." "It's only complicated because you're making it complicated." Emma grabbed a bag of chips and tossed it in the cart. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon. He shows up. He remembers things. He makes you smile in a way I've never seen before. What exactly are you waiting for? What if it doesn't work? What if it does?" The question followed Natalie home, echoing in her head as she unpacked groceries, as she showered, as she tried and failed to focus on the book she'd been reading for weeks. Her phone buzzed. "Thomas, emergency, need your help." Her heart jumped. "Natalie." "What's wrong?" "Thomas, I'm at the grocery store and there are 17 types of pasta. How is anyone supposed to make this decision?" She laughed, relief and affection flooding through her in equal measure. "Natalie, Penny, always Penny." "Thomas, wise woman, dinner at mine tonight. I promise only minimal food poisoning." "Natalie, deal." And as she got ready, choosing her outfit with more care than she'd admit, Natalie realized Emma was right. She was already in too deep. The only question was whether she was brave enough to admit it. Thomas's apartment was nothing like Natalie expected. She'd imagined something cold and modern, all glass and steel and expensive art, chosen by an interior designer who charged by the hour. But when he opened the door that Saturday evening, she stepped into warmth. Exposed brick walls, worn leather furniture that looked lived in rather than staged, bookshelves crammed with paperbacks and framed photos of people who were clearly family, a guitar leaning in the corner, plants on the windowsill that were somehow thriving. "You play?" Natalie asked, nodding toward the guitar. "Badly. Very badly." Thomas took her coat, his fingers brushing her shoulders as he slipped it off. The touch lingered a moment longer than necessary. I bought it thinking I'd teach myself during lockdown. Got through 3 chords before accepting I have no musical talent whatsoever. I'd like to hear you play sometime. Trust me, you wouldn't. He led her toward the kitchen, where something was simmering on the stove that actually smelled good. Wine? Fair warning. I know even less about wine than I do about music. Whatever you have is fine. He poured them each a glass of red, and they fell into the easy rhythm they'd developed over the past weeks. Natalie chopped vegetables while Thomas managed the pasta, their movements synchronized like they'd been doing this for years rather than months. They talked about everything and nothing, a difficult client he'd dealt with that week, a campaign pitch she was nervous about, the Netflix show they'd both started watching separately and now texted commentary about in real time. "Taste this," Thomas said, holding out a wooden spoon with sauce on it. Natalie leaned forward, letting him guide it to her mouth. The sauce was rich, tangy, surprisingly perfect. "Where did you learn to make this?" "YouTube. I'm a man of many hidden talents." His voice dropped slightly, and when Natalie looked up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Most of which I'm still hoping to show you." The air between them shifted, charged with the electricity that had been building for weeks. Natalie set down her wineglass, her hand trembling slightly. "Thomas, I know, we should eat." But he didn't move, didn't look away. "In a minute." They ate on the couch, another unspoken rule broken. Plates balanced on laps, a movie neither of them chose playing in the background, the space between them growing smaller with each passing moment. When Natalie reached for her wine, her shoulder pressed against his. When Thomas adjusted his position, his thigh ended up flush against hers. "This is good," Natalie said, more to break the silence than anything else. "The food or this?" Thomas gestured vaguely between them. "Both." "Yeah." His voice was rough. "It really is." They finished eating, and Thomas took their plates to the kitchen. When he came back, he didn't sit in his previous spot. He sat closer, close enough that Natalie could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. "Movie?" he asked, but his eyes said something entirely different. "Sure." He put on something with Ryan Gosling, a safe choice, a romantic drama they'd both seen before. Natalie curled up against the armrest, pulling a throw blanket over her legs. Thomas settled beside her, and somehow gradually the space between them disappeared. First, his arm along the back of the couch, then her head finding his shoulder, his hand sliding down to rest on her waist, her fingers playing absently with the fabric of his shirt. Each touch was casual, innocent, but loaded with intention. "You're not watching," Thomas murmured against her hair. "Neither are you. Can't seem to focus." His hand moved in slow circles on her hip, the touch burning through the thin fabric of her dress. "You're distracting." "I'm just sitting here." "Exactly." He shifted, and suddenly they were facing each other, her back against the armrest, his body angled toward hers. "You're always just sitting there or just laughing or just existing, and somehow it's the most distracting thing in the world." Natalie's heart hammered. "Thomas, tell me to stop." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Tell me I'm reading this wrong and I'll back off. I'll go back to being your friend who brings you sandwiches and pretends that's enough." "And if I don't want you to stop?" His eyes darkened. "Then I'm going to kiss you finally, and I'm not sure I'll be able to stop at just one." "Then don't." The word had barely left her lips before his mouth was on hers, soft at first, tentative, giving her space to pull away. But Natalie didn't pull away. She leaned in, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, weeks of tension finally finding release. Thomas's hand slid into her hair, angling her head, and Natalie's entire world narrowed to the taste of wine on his lips, the scrape of his stubble against her skin, the way he kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "That was... yeah. Should we Probably not. But neither of them moved. Thomas's thumb traced lazy patterns on her hip, and Natalie's fingers had found their way under the hem of his shirt, touching bare skin that was warm and solid and perfect. "Stay," Thomas whispered. "Just stay tonight. We don't have to. I just want you here." Natalie nodded beyond words. They moved to his bedroom, the air thick with possibility and restraint. Thomas gave her one of his t-shirts to sleep in, turning around while she changed, a gesture so sweetly respectful it made her chest ache. They lay down on opposite sides of the bed, the space between them feeling like miles and inches all at once. "Good night, Nat," Thomas said into the darkness. "Good night." But sleep didn't come. Natalie lay there, hyper-aware of every breath he took, every small shift of his body. And then, slowly, she felt him move closer. His arm slid around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. She fit perfectly, like they'd been designed to sleep exactly like this. "Is this okay?" he murmured against her neck. "More than okay." His lips brushed her shoulder, a kiss so soft it felt like a secret. "Sleep, beautiful." And she did, wrapped in his arms, everything that had been building between them suspended in this perfect, aching moment of almost. The invitation came from Emma, who'd somehow convinced Natalie that a weekend at a mountain cabin with friends was exactly what she needed. Fresh air, good company, no work emails, Emma had promised. Plus, Thomas is coming. That last part was what sealed it. They'd been living in the aftermath of that night for 2 weeks now. Stolen kisses in her apartment hallway, his hand finding hers under restaurant tables, good-night texts that turned into good-morning ones because neither of them could stop talking. But they still hadn't named it, hadn't made it official, and Natalie was starting to wonder if the ambiguity was protecting them or slowly driving them both insane. The cabin was 2 hours outside the city, tucked into pine trees with a view of mountains that looked like something from a postcard. Emma and her boyfriend Jake had arrived first, along with 2 other couples Natalie knew from college. Thomas pulled up just as she was unloading her bag, his SUV coated in road dust, his hair wind-blown, his smile when he saw her bright enough to rival the afternoon sun. "Hey, you!" He pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than friendly, his lips brushing her temple. "Missed you. You saw me yesterday." "I know." His arms tightened around her. "Still missed you." Emma appeared on the porch, grinning like the matchmaker she was. "Separate rooms, or are we finally admitting what everyone already knows?" "Separate," Natalie said quickly. At the same time, Thomas said, "Whatever Nat wants." They ended up in rooms across the hall from each other, close enough to feel connected, far enough to maintain the pretense that they weren't completely gone for each other. The afternoon dissolved into lazy conversation and too much wine. Someone started a fire in the outdoor pit as the sun began setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Jake pulled out a Bluetooth speaker, and suddenly the mountain air was filled with music. Old classics and new favorites, the kind of playlist that made everyone nostalgic for moments they'd never actually lived. Thomas sat across the fire from Natalie, but his eyes barely left her. Every time she looked up, he was watching, not in a way that felt uncomfortable, but in a way that made her skin warm and her heart race. When she shivered slightly in the cooling evening air, he disappeared inside and returned with the flannel shirt. "Here." He draped it over her shoulders, his hands lingering. "Can't have you freezing." "My hero," she teased, but she pulled the shirt closer, breathing in the scent of him, clean laundry and wood smoke and that cologne she'd come to associate with safety. "Always," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Someone turned up the music. A slow song drifted through the speakers, one of those soulful acoustic covers that felt designed for moments exactly like this. Jake pulled Emma to her feet, spinning her in a clumsy circle that made everyone laugh. The other couples followed, pairing off, swaying in the firelight. Thomas stood and crossed to Natalie, extending his hand. "Dance with me." "Out here?" "Why not?" She took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. They moved away from the fire slightly, finding a patch of grass under the stars. Thomas's arm slid around her waist, pulling her close, and Natalie's breath caught at the sudden intimacy of it, his body pressed against hers, his hand warm on the small of her back, their fingers intertwined. "I don't really know how to do this," she admitted. "Neither do I." He started swaying gently, guiding her into a rhythm that had nothing to do with actual dancing and everything to do with finding excuses to hold each other. "But I don't think anyone's judging." They moved together, and Natalie let herself sink into it, the solid warmth of him, the way his thumb traced absent circles on her hip, how perfectly her head fit in the curve of his neck. Around them, their friends laughed and talked, but it all faded into background noise. There was only this: Thomas's heartbeat against her cheek, his breath stirring her hair, the way his hand tightened on her waist like he was afraid she might disappear. "Nat?" His voice was rough, uncertain. "Yeah? I need to tell you something." Her heart jumped. "Okay." He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I'm falling for you. Have been since that first night in the wine bar, if I'm being honest. And I know we haven't defined this, haven't put labels on it, but I can't keep pretending that what I feel is casual. Because it's not. It's so far from casual, it's terrifying." Natalie pulled back just enough to look at him. His eyes were dark, vulnerable, waiting for her to either catch him or let him fall. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too. What if we mess this up? What if we're better as—" "We won't be." His hand came up to cup her face. "I can't promise perfect. Can't promise we won't fight or have hard days or struggle, but I can promise I'll show up every single time, for as long as you'll have me." Around them, the music shifted to something more upbeat, but they stayed locked in their slow dance, the world narrowing to just the two of them. "Thomas, you don't have to say it back. Not yet. I just needed you to know where I stand." But the thing was, Natalie did know what she wanted to say. Had known for weeks, maybe. She'd just been too afraid to admit it out loud, as if naming it would somehow make it more real, more fragile, more capable of shattering. "I'm falling too," she said finally. "So hard it scares me." His smile was radiant, transformative. "Yeah? Yeah." He kissed her then, in front of everyone, in the glow of the fire with the stars overhead and their friends whooping in the background. But Natalie barely heard any of it. There was only Thomas, the taste of him, the feel of his hands tangling in her hair, the way he kissed her like she was his answer to every question he'd ever asked. When they finally broke apart, Emma was crying happy tears, Jake was clapping, and someone had turned the music back up. "About damn time," Emma called out. Thomas laughed against Natalie's lips. "She's not wrong." "No," Natalie agreed, her arms around his neck, her heart full to bursting. "She's really not." They stayed outside until the fire burned down to embers, Natalie wrapped in Thomas's arms, both of them talking quietly about everything and nothing. When they finally went inside, Thomas walked her to her room, kissing her slowly against the doorframe. "Good night," he whispered. "Stay," she said impulsively. His eyes darkened with want and restraint. "Nat, just to sleep, like last time. I sleep better when you're there." "Me too." They lay in twin beds, pushed against opposite walls of the small cabin bedroom, the space between them feeling like an ocean despite being only a few feet apart. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting silver shadows across the wooden floor, and somewhere outside an owl called into the night. Natalie couldn't sleep. She could hear Thomas's breathing, steady but not quite the rhythm of sleep. He was awake too, both of them trapped in the strange limbo of wanting more but not knowing how to ask for it. "Thomas?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah?" Immediate response. Definitely awake. "Are you scared?" Silence stretched between them, heavy with honesty waiting to be spoken. "Terrified," he finally said, "every single day." "Of what?" She heard him shift, could imagine him staring at the ceiling the way she was. "Of messing this up. Of you waking up one day and realizing I'm not who you thought I was. Of losing something before I've even really had it." Natalie's chest tightened. "I'm scared too." Of me. Of this. Of how much I already feel. Of how quickly everything changed. She turned on her side to face his bed even though she could barely see him in the darkness. 3 months ago, I didn't know you existed. And now the thought of not having you in my life feels impossible. I've never felt like this before, she continued, the words spilling out now that she'd started. Not even close. And I don't know what to do with it, how to protect myself from it, how to protect us from me inevitably finding a way to self-sabotage, because that's what I do when things get real. She heard Thomas move, the rustle of sheets, footsteps on the floor. Then his silhouette appeared beside her bed, and he was kneeling beside it, his face level with hers on the pillow. Can I? He gestured to the small space beside her. Natalie nodded, scooting over. The bed was narrow, meant for one person, but Thomas climbed in anyway, lying on his side facing her. Their faces were inches apart, his breath warm on her skin. Listen to me, he said softly, his hand finding hers under the blanket. You're not going to self-sabotage this. You're not going to push me away. You want to know why. Why? Because I won't let you. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I see you, Natalie, all of you. The parts you show everyone and the parts you try to hide. The confident woman who crushes presentations at work and the scared girl who thinks she's not enough. And I'm choosing all of it, every messy, complicated, beautiful part. Tears pricked Natalie's eyes. How do you always know exactly what to say? Because I pay attention. Because you matter. He brought their joined hands up between them, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. And because I'm just as scared as you are, so I understand what you need to hear. What are you most afraid of? She asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment, his expression vulnerable in the dim light. That I'll disappoint you. That the reality of being with me, the long work hours, the stress, the parts of me that aren't nearly as put together as I pretend, will be too much. That you'll look at me one day and think you could do better. Thomas, that's insane. You're broken. He smiled sadly. More than you know. I've got baggage, Nat. Failed relationships, trust issues from an ex who cheated, workaholic tendencies that drove away everyone who tried to get close. I'm not the fairy tale here. Neither am I. Natalie moved closer until their foreheads touched. I'm cynical and defensive. I push people away before they can leave. I've convinced myself I'm better off alone so many times I almost believed it. And then you showed up and ruined all my carefully constructed walls. Sorry, not sorry. His voice held a hint of humor now. I mean it, though. You scare me. This scares me. Good. Thomas's hand slid from hers to cup her face. Because the things worth having are usually the things that scare us most. And you, Natalie Carter, are worth every ounce of fear. We're really doing this? She whispered. Making this real? We already made it real. That night at the wine bar, maybe. Or that first coffee date. Or maybe right now, in this moment. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. But yeah, I want to do this officially, completely. I want you to be mine, and I want to be yours. What if we fail? What if we don't? It was the same question Emma had asked weeks ago, but hearing it from Thomas felt different, felt like a promise and a challenge all at once. I want to try, Natalie said finally. I'm terrified, but I want to try. That's all I'm asking. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips, soft, reverent touches that felt like sealing a pact. We'll figure it out together, the good days and the hard ones. Deal? Deal. They stayed like that, wrapped around each other in the too-small bed, whispering in the darkness about fears and hopes and the terrifying beauty of letting someone in. Thomas told her about his parents' divorce, about watching love turn toxic and vowing never to repeat their mistakes. Natalie told him about her first heartbreak, about the man who'd made her feel small and the years it took to remember her worth. He was an idiot, Thomas murmured against her hair. Ancient history. Good, because you're extraordinary, and anyone who couldn't see that doesn't deserve a second of your time. Natalie's hand found its way under his shirt, resting flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her palm. I don't want to go back to my own bed. Then don't. What will everyone think in the morning? That we're two adults who care about each other spending the night together, and if they think anything else, that's their problem, not ours. She laughed softly. When did you get so wise? About 3 minutes ago. I'm improvising here. They fell silent, the exhaustion of emotional honesty finally catching up with them. Thomas's arm tightened around her waist, pulling her impossibly closer. Natalie's leg tangled with his, their bodies finding a configuration that felt like it had always existed, just waiting for them to discover it. Thomas? Thank you. For being patient with me. For not giving up when I was being difficult. You were never difficult, just careful. And I get it. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Your heart is precious, Nat. It makes sense you'd want to protect it. I trust you with it, she whispered into the darkness. I'm choosing to trust you. His arms tightened around her, and she felt him exhale shakily. I won't take that lightly. I promise. I know. Sleep finally claimed them like that, intertwined, vulnerable, both of them holding on like they'd found something too valuable to ever let go. Sunday afternoon arrived lazy and golden, the kind of day that made everyone reluctant to pack up and return to real life. The group gathered in the cabin's living room, sprawled across couches and floor cushions, playing a drinking game that had devolved into something between truth or dare and couples therapy. Natalie sat cross-legged on the floor, Thomas beside her, their knees touching in a casual intimacy that had become second nature overnight. After spending the night wrapped in each other's arms, something had shifted. A barrier had fallen, leaving them softer with each other, more open. Okay, Emma said, shuffling a deck of cards that determined who answered what. Natalie, you're up. Natalie drew a card and groaned. Truth question. If someone in this room asked you to date them right now, who would it be, and what would you say? The room erupted in knowing laughter. Jake whistled. Emma looked entirely too pleased with herself. That's not fair, Natalie protested, feeling her cheeks heat. You rigged this. I did not. The cards are random. Emma's grin said otherwise. Now answer. Natalie glanced at Thomas, who was watching her with barely contained amusement, one eyebrow raised in challenge. Under the coffee table, his hand found hers, squeezing gently. Well, Natalie began, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. Hypothetically speaking. No hypotheticals, someone called out. Fine. She took a breath, looking directly at Thomas now. If Thomas asked me to be his girlfriend right now, I'd say yes, obviously. The room exploded. Cheers, applause, Emma actually crying happy tears again. But Natalie only saw Thomas, whose expression had gone from playful to intensely serious, his dark eyes locked on hers, with an emotion that made her breath catch. Yeah? He asked quietly, the single word cutting through the noise. Yeah. Good. His hand squeezed hers harder under the table. Because I'm asking. Right now? In front of everyone? Why not? They already know. We already know. He shifted to face her more fully, seemingly oblivious to their audience. Natalie Carter, will you be my girlfriend? Officially, exclusively, all the labels you want. Her heart hammered so hard, she was sure everyone could hear it. You're really doing this? I'm really doing this. His thumb traced circles on her palm, a touch that grounded her. So? What do you say? There was only one answer, had only ever been one answer since that night in the wine bar, if she was being honest. Yes, she whispered. Then louder, yes. Thomas's smile was blinding. He cupped her face with his free hand and kissed her, soft, sweet, perfect, while their friends cheered and Emma sobbed into Jake's shoulder about true love and destiny. When they broke apart, Natalie was grinning so hard her face hurt. That was smooth. I've been planning it for weeks, Thomas admitted. Was waiting for the right moment. A drinking game? Hey, I work with what I'm given. He kissed her again, quick and playful. Besides, now it's a good story. The game continued, but Natalie barely paid attention. She was too focused on the way Thomas kept touching her, his hand on her knee, his arm around her shoulders, fingers playing with her hair, little gestures of affection that said mine and yours and ours without needing words. "You two are disgustingly cute," Emma said later when they were cleaning up. Thomas had gone to help Jake with something outside, leaving the women alone in the kitchen. "I know," Natalie said, unable to keep the smile off her face. "It's kind of horrifying." "You deserve this." Emma pulled her into a hug. "You deserve someone who shows up, who stays, who looks at you like you're his whole world. And that's exactly what Thomas does." "I'm scared I'll mess it up." "Then don't." Emma pulled back, gripping Natalie's shoulders. "For once in your life, just let yourself be happy. Stop waiting for the other shoe to drop and enjoy the fact that you found something real. When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just never listened." Emma grinned. "Now, go find your boyfriend and make the rest of us jealous with your happiness." Natalie found Thomas on the back porch, leaning against the railing, looking out at the mountains. The afternoon sun caught in his hair, painting him in gold, and her chest tightened with the overwhelming realization of how much she felt for him. "Hey, girlfriend," he said without turning around, somehow sensing her presence. "Hey, boyfriend." The words felt foreign and perfect on her tongue. "That's going to take some getting used to." "We've got time." He held out his hand, and she took it, letting him pull her against his side. They stood like that, wrapped in each other, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Thank you," Natalie said softly. "For what?" "For being patient. For not giving up when I was being impossible. For making this easy when I expected it to be hard." Thomas turned to face her, his hands settling on her hips. "Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done, Nat. Everything else might be complicated, but that part? That's simple." Her breath caught. "You love me?" "Yeah." No hesitation, no fear. "I do, have for a while now. You don't have to say it back. I love you too," she interrupted, the words spilling out before she could overthink them. "I think I have since you pretended to be my jealous boyfriend and saved me from the worst date of my life." His laugh was warm, joyful. "Best decision I ever made. Crashing my blind date. No, choosing you. Every day since then, choosing you." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "And I'll keep choosing you. For as long as you'll let me." Natalie's arms wrapped around his neck. "That might be a really long time." "Good." Thomas pulled her closer until there was no space left between them. "Because I'm not going anywhere." They stayed on the porch until Jake called them back inside for dinner, stealing kisses between words, learning the new language of being together, officially, completely, irreversibly. Later that night, driving back to the city in Thomas's car, their hands intertwined over the center console, Natalie felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. The fear was still there, lurking in the corners, but it was quieter now, manageable, because Thomas was beside her, and he wasn't running, and neither was she. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, glancing over at her. "How different my life looks now than it did 3 months ago. Good different or scary different?" "Both," she squeezed his hand, "but mostly good." "Yeah," he agreed softly, "mostly good." They returned to Thomas's apartment that night, the city lights blurring past the car windows, neither of them quite ready to say goodbye and retreat to separate spaces. Being official had changed something fundamental, removed the last barrier between wanting and having, between holding back and letting go. Thomas unlocked his door, and Natalie followed him inside, the familiarity of his space wrapping around her like a second home. He poured them each a glass of wine, but they left them untouched on the kitchen counter, too aware of each other to focus on anything else. "Stay tonight," Thomas said, though it wasn't really a question. "No more separate beds. No more pretending we both sleep better apart when we both know that's a lie." "Okay," Natalie whispered. He took her hand, leading her to his bedroom. The space felt different tonight, charged with intention, with the unspoken understanding that something was about to shift irreversibly. Thomas turned on a small lamp, casting the room in warm, golden light, and faced her. "We don't have to," he started. I know. Natalie stepped closer, her hands finding the hem of his shirt. But I want to. I want you. His breath caught, his hands covering hers. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. Thomas cupped her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones with devastating gentleness. I need you to know something first. This isn't just physical for me. It's never been just physical. You're everything, Nat. Everything. Her eyes stung with emotion. You're everything to me, too. He kissed her then, slow, deep, reverent. Not the playful kisses they'd shared before, but something more profound. A promise made with lips and breath, and the way his hands trembled slightly as they slid into her hair. Natalie's fingers worked the buttons of his shirt, pushing it off his shoulders. Her palms explored the planes of his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her touch. Thomas inhaled sharply, his hands moving to the zipper at the back of her dress. Can I? His voice was rough with restraint. Please. He unzipped her slowly, his knuckles grazing her spine, each touch sending shivers cascading through her. The dress pooled at her feet, and Thomas stepped back, his eyes dark with want and wonder. You're so beautiful, he breathed. So incredibly beautiful. Natalie reached for him, pulling him back to her, needing his warmth, his closeness. They moved to the bed, a tangle of limbs and whispered names and touches that spoke volumes. Thomas took his time, learning her, memorizing her, treating her like something precious and breakable and infinitely valuable. Tell me if it's too much, he murmured against her neck, his lips tracing a path down her throat. Tell me what you need. You, she gasped. Just you. They came together slowly, carefully, each movement deliberate and laden with emotion. There was no rush, no performance. Just two people learning each other in the most intimate way possible, their bodies finding a rhythm that felt ancient and brand new all at once. Thomas held her gaze the entire time, his forehead pressed to hers, their breath mingling. I love you, he whispered, the words punctuated with kisses. God, I love you so much. I love you too. Natalie's hands cupped his face, pulling him down for a kiss that tasted like forever. I love you. When they finally reached that peak together, it wasn't explosive or dramatic. It was quiet, profound, perfect. A moment of complete connection where nothing else existed except the two of them, and this feeling that was too big for words. After, they lay tangled together, hearts still racing, skin damp with sweat, neither wanting to move and break the spell. Thomas pressed kisses to her shoulder, her neck, anywhere he could reach. You okay? He asked softly. More than okay. Natalie turned in his arms to face him, her hand resting over his heart. That was, yeah. His smile was tender, satisfied. It really was. They stayed awake, talking in whispers, learning new things about each other. Thomas told her about his first love, about the heartbreak that had made him cautious. Natalie told him about the years she'd spent alone, convincing herself she preferred it that way. They laughed at shared insecurities, confessed secret fears, built new intimacy on top of what they'd just shared. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them. Thomas pulled the blanket over them both, tucking Natalie against his chest, her head resting in the curve of his shoulder. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare back, and she hummed contentedly. I could get used to this, she murmured, already half asleep. Good, because I'm not letting you go. He kissed the top of her head. Ever. Promise. Promise. When Natalie woke, dawn was just breaking, painting the room in soft shades of pink and gold. Thomas was still asleep beside her, one arm draped possessively across her waist, his face relaxed in a way she rarely saw when he was awake. She studied him in the gentle light, the strong line of his jaw, the way his lashes cast shadows on his cheeks, the small scar above his eyebrow she'd never noticed before. This man, this beautiful, complicated, wonderful man, who'd crashed into her life and changed everything. Thomas stirred, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw her watching him, His smile was sleepy and genuine and absolutely devastating. "Morning, beautiful," he rasped, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning." He pulled her closer, burying his face in her neck. "Last night was perfect," Natalie finished. "It was perfect. Stay today. Call in sick to work. Let's just stay in bed and pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist," she laughed. "I have a presentation at 10. Skip it." "Thomas." "Fine." He pulled back, mock pouting. "But tonight, you're mine again. All night. No work, no distractions." "Deal." They got ready together, a new domestic intimacy unfolding in shared bathroom space and stolen kisses between brushing teeth. Thomas made coffee while Natalie borrowed one of his shirts, the fabric hanging loose on her frame, smelling like him. "Keep it," he said, watching her from the kitchen. "Looks better on you anyway." At his door, saying goodbye felt harder than it should have. They'd see each other in a few hours, but after the night they'd shared, even that felt like too long. "Tonight," Thomas promised, kissing her one more time. "I'll pick you up after work." "I'll be ready." Natalie left his apartment with her heart full, her body still humming with the memory of his touch, and the absolute certainty that everything had changed. They'd crossed a line there was no uncrossing, had become something permanent, something real, and she'd never been less afraid of anything in her life. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after that perfect night. Natalie stared at her screen, reading the words over and over, her coffee going cold in her hand. "Congratulations. You've been selected for the Seattle campaign launch. 3 months, full relocation package, career-defining opportunity. 3 months. Seattle, 2,000 miles away from Thomas." Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. "Natalie, can we talk tonight?" Something came up. "Thomas, everything okay?" Natalie, "Yeah, we need to talk." The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before his response came through. "Thomas, I'll be there at 7. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." But Natalie wasn't sure this was something they could figure out. She'd worked toward this kind of opportunity her entire career, a chance to lead a major campaign, to prove herself, to finally write something that mattered. But accepting meant leaving Thomas just when they'd finally found their rhythm, when everything felt perfect and right and permanent. When Thomas arrived that evening, he took one look at her face and pulled her into his arms. "Tell me," he said simply. So she did. Explained the opportunity, the timeline, the impossible choice. Thomas listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening slightly, but his hold on her never loosening. 3 months, he said finally. 3 months. "That's not forever, Nat." "It feels like forever," her voice cracked. "We just figured this out. She couldn't finish the sentence. Thomas guided her to the couch, sitting down and pulling her onto his lap. "Look at me." When she did, his eyes were fierce, determined. "This is your dream, the thing you've been working toward. You have to go." "But no buts. You go to Seattle, you lead this campaign. You show them exactly how brilliant you are. And I'll be here, supporting you, missing you, and counting down the days until you come home. What if the distance changes things?" "It won't." His certainty was absolute. "I've spent my whole life looking for something real, Nat. Now that I've found it, found you, some miles aren't going to change that. We're stronger than geography." She wanted to believe him, wanted to have his confidence, but fear clawed at her chest. Fear that absence would breed distance, that out of sight would become out of mind, that this perfect thing they'd built would crumble under the weight of separation. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too." He kissed her forehead. "But I believe in us." "Do you?" Did she? Natalie searched herself for the answer and found it waiting. Solid, certain, undeniable. Yes. She believed in them, in what they had, what they were building. In Thomas and his promises, and the way he'd shown up for her every single day since they'd met. "Yes," she said, "I believe in us. Then we'll make it work." His smile was gentle, but edged with sadness. "It's going to suck. I'm not going to pretend it won't." But 3 months is nothing compared to a lifetime, and that's what I want with you, Natalie. A lifetime. She left for Seattle 2 weeks later. Thomas drove her to the airport, neither of them saying much, both trying to be strong for the other. At the security checkpoint, he pulled her into a kiss that felt like a vow. 3 months, he murmured against her lips. And then you come home to me. 3 months, she echoed. The first month was brutal. Video calls couldn't capture his warmth, his presence, the way he made everything better just by being there. They texted constantly. Good morning messages and good night calls and everything in between, but it wasn't the same. Natalie threw herself into work, leading the campaign with a ferocity that impressed her new team and kept her from dwelling too much on what she was missing. Thomas, how'd the presentation go? Natalie, killed it. They loved the concept. Thomas, that's my girl. Proud of you. Natalie, miss you. Thomas, miss you more. 62 days left. He was counting. The realization made her chest ache and her heart swell simultaneously. The second month was harder. A colleague asked her to dinner. Professionally, he claimed, though his intentions were clear. Natalie declined politely and immediately called Thomas, needing to hear his voice. Some guy hit on you? Thomas asked, and she could hear the smile in his voice despite the distance. Yeah. Can't blame him. You're incredible. A pause. But you're also mine. Yours, she confirmed. Always yours. Good, because I'm going crazy here without you, Nat. My apartment feels empty, my bed feels too big. Everything reminds me of you. Only 1 more month, she said, though it felt like an eternity. 1 more month. But Thomas couldn't make it that long. Natalie was in her hotel room reviewing campaign materials when someone knocked on her door. She opened it expecting housekeeping and instead found Thomas, disheveled, breathless, carrying a duffel bag and wearing the biggest grin she'd ever seen. Thomas! She stared at him, convinced she was hallucinating. What are you doing here? I couldn't stay away anymore. He dropped his bag and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground. I know we said 3 months, but I missed you so much I thought I'd lose my mind. So I got on a plane. You flew across the country because you missed me. I'd fly around the world if that's where you were. He set her down but didn't let go, his hands framing her face. I love you, and I know you have work, and I won't get in the way. But I needed to see you, touch you, make sure this is still real. Natalie kissed him, deep, desperate, pouring 3 months of longing into it. When they broke apart, she was crying and laughing simultaneously. It's real, she promised. So real. Thomas stayed for the weekend. They barely left her hotel room, making up for lost time, relearning each other, remembering why they'd chosen this, chosen each other. On Sunday night, lying tangled together in sheets that smelled like him, Natalie realized something profound. I'm coming home, she said. Thomas propped himself up on one elbow. What? The campaign wraps in 2 weeks. I could stay longer, network, build connections, but I don't want to. I want to come home, to you, to us. His smile was radiant. Yeah? Yeah. She pulled him down for a kiss. Because you were right. Some things are worth more than career opportunities, and what we have? It's worth everything. 2 weeks later, Thomas picked her up at the airport. The moment Natalie saw him waiting at arrivals, everything else fell away. She ran to him and he caught her, spinning her around, both of them laughing and crying and holding on like they'd never let go again. Welcome home, Thomas whispered against her hair. I love you, Natalie said, pulling back to look at him. I love you so much. I love you too. He kissed her, slow and sweet and perfect. Now let's go home. Our home. And they did, together, finally, permanently, exactly where they belonged. Atali had walked into that wine bar expecting nothing more than an awkward hour and a polite escape. She'd left with something she never saw coming, a man who would become her home, her partner, her unexpected forever. Sometimes the best love stories don't start with grand gestures or perfect timing. They start with a stranger's smile, a willingness to take a chance, and the courage to let down walls that were built to protect but only served to isolate. Thomas taught her that love isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and choosing each other anyway. It's about showing up, staying present, and believing that some connections are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. Their story wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and terrifying in all the best ways. But it was real. And real, Natalie learned, was infinitely better than safe. So here's the question that lingers. How many beautiful beginnings do we miss because we're too afraid to say yes to the unexpected? If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Your support means the world and helps us keep creating stories that move hearts.